You watch others effortlessly shape workplace outcomes while your best ideas get ignored and your influence goes nowhere. Every day you see decisions made without your input, while less qualified people seem to control situations behind the scenes. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who mastered the art of invisible influence, controlling outcomes so subtly that enemies defeated themselves while thinking they were winning. What I discovered about strategic control will transform how you wield influence without anyone realizing you're the one pulling the strings. The battlefield may have changed from ancient China to modern offices, but the principles of invisible control remain as powerful today as they were 2,500 years ago. Whether you're navigating corporate politics or leading a team, the same strategies that won ancient wars can win modern workplace battles. The invisible general's seal I once carried commanded armies without the enemy knowing who held true authority. Just as you can command respect and results without revealing your hand. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for strategic mastery. In the depths of my palace, I maintained a silent war counselor hidden chamber, where I planned victories that appeared to happen by chance. Few knew of its existence, and fewer still understood its purpose. It was there, surrounded by maps and scrolls, that I first grasped the profound truth that would define my approach to power. Visible authority creates resistance, while invisible influence creates compliance. I learned this lesson through painful experience. Early in my career, I commanded through direct orders and visible displays of power. My soldiers obeyed, but their obedience was grudging. My enemies knew exactly where the threat came from, allowing them to prepare counter-strategies. I was strong, but I was also predictable. My power was like a bright flame, impressive to behold, but easily seen and therefore easily extinguished. The transformation came during a campaign against a particularly cunning opponent. I realized that every time I showed my hand, I gave my enemy information. Every direct command revealed my priorities. Every visible move telegraphed my intentions. I was fighting with my strengths exposed and my strategies announced. This was not warfare, it was elaborate suicide. So I retreated into the shadows, not in defeat, but in wisdom. I began to let others take credit for victories I had orchestrated. I allowed my lieutenants to believe they had conceived strategies I had carefully planted in their minds. I watched as my enemies celebrated small wins that were actually leading them toward their ultimate destruction. The weight of this invisible command was unlike anything I had experienced before. There is a profound loneliness in true strategic control. You cannot share your victories because admitting your role would destroy your advantage. You cannot seek recognition because recognition would expose your methods. You cannot even trust your closest advisors with the full extent of your influence because knowledge of your true reach would change their behavior in ways that would compromise your position. I remember nights in that silent war council, staring at maps that showed not just territories, but the invisible threads of influence I had woven throughout the region. Each thread represented a person who believed they were making their own choices while actually serving my greater design. The burden of holding so many lives in my hands, of knowing that my slightest miscalculation could lead to disaster, was immense. Yet this burden was necessary. The alternative visible power was ultimately weak because it could be directly challenged. Invisible power, properly wielded, was nearly invincible because it could not be fought directly. How do you battle an influence you cannot see? How do you resist a control you do not even know exists? The personal cost was real. I became the invisible hand that shaped destiny, but I could never fully enjoy the fruits of my labor. I had to watch others receive praise for achievements that were mine. I had to remain silent when my strategies were misunderstood or I had to accept that my greatest victories would be the ones where my role remained completely hidden. This is the weight of invisible command. The knowledge that your true power lies not in what others see you do, but in what you accomplish while they are looking elsewhere. My weathered strategy map became my most treasured possession, not for its monetary value, but for what it taught me about the nature of true victory. This map, worn smooth by countless hours of study, showed not just where my forces were positioned, but how I had arranged them to win without fighting. Every marking represented a principle that would later become fundamental to my understanding of hidden influence. The map revealed my first great insight: direct confrontation always fails in the long term. Even when you win through force, you create enemies who will remember their defeat and seek revenge. Every visible victory plants the seeds of future conflict. I learned this when I crushed a rebellion through overwhelming military might. The rebels were defeated, but their children grew up hearing stories of their parents' heroic resistance. 20 years later, those children led an even more dangerous uprising. This experience taught me that winning before the battle begins is not just more elegant, it is more permanent. When you position your forces so skillfully that your opponent has no choice but to surrender, you create no martyrs. When you arrange circumstances so that your enemy's best choice is to do exactly what you want them to do, you transform opponents into allies without them realizing what has happened. The principle of winning without fighting became the cornerstone of my strategic philosophy. I discovered that the highest form of warfare is to frustrate the enemy's plans while they are still being formed. This requires you to think several moves ahead, to anticipate not just what your opponent will do, but what they will think about doing. You must position yourself so that every path they might choose leads to an outcome that serves your interests. I developed this approach through careful observation of human nature. People always choose what they believe to be their best option at any given moment. If you can influence what they perceive as their best option, you can control their choices without them ever feeling controlled. This is the difference between force and influence. Force pushes against resistance, while influence guides willingness. My strategy map showed me how to make enemies defeat themselves. I would position my forces in ways that made certain moves irresistible to my opponents, even though those moves would ultimately destroy them. I learned to present choices where every option served my purpose. I discovered how to make my enemy's strengths work against them by creating situations where their natural reactions would be counterproductive. The true power of hidden influence lies in its subtlety. When you operate in shadows, your opponents cannot prepare specific countermeasures because they do not know what they are defending against. They cannot rally resistance because they cannot identify the threat. They cannot unite against you because they do not realize they are being influenced. This principle transformed my entire approach to conflict. Instead of meeting force with force, I learned to redirect force. Instead of opposing directly, I learned to guide indirectly. Instead of demanding obedience, I learned to cultivate willing cooperation. The weathered strategy map reminded me daily that true victory comes not from destroying your enemies, but from making them irrelevant. The oracles, mirror, bronze mirror, polished to perfection, became my tool for studying the most complex battlefield of all, human nature. This mirror showed me not just my own reflection, but taught me to see the hidden motivations and secret desires that drive every person. Understanding these invisible currents became more valuable than understanding tactics or terrain. I learned to read what people do not say, which is often more revealing than what they do say. A minister who speaks too enthusiastically about his loyalty is usually planning betrayal. A general who boasts too loudly about his victories is usually compensating for hidden failures. A subordinate who agrees too quickly with everything is usually harboring secret resentments. The oracle's mirror taught me to look beyond words to the emotions and intentions beneath them. Human nature follows predictable patterns, and those patterns can be read like weather signs. Fear makes people defensive and prone to mistakes. Greed makes them take risks they should avoid. Pride makes them overestimate their abilities. Insecurity makes them desperate for validation. Once you understand these patterns, you can predict behavior with startling accuracy. I developed a system for identifying what people truly want, not what they claim to want. Everyone has public desires, the things they are willing to admit. They want and private desires, the things they dare not speak aloud. The person who publicly claims to want the good of the group privately wants recognition for their virtue. The person who publicly pursues wealth privately wants security and respect. The person who publicly seeks power privately wants to feel important and valued. When you understand someone's private desires, you hold the key to their behavior. You can present opportunities that appeal to their hidden motivations while appearing to serve their stated goals. You can position yourself as the person who can help them achieve what they really want, even if they have never admitted it to themselves. The Oracle's mirror also revealed the invisible power structures that exist in every group. The person with the highest official rank is not always the person with the most influence. The person who speaks most loudly is not always the person others listen to. The person who appears to be in charge is not always the person making the real decisions. True power often operates through informal networks, friendships, family connections, shared experiences, mutual obligations. The general's aide who has his complete trust may wield more influence than the colonel who outranks him. The minister's wife who has his ear at dinner may shape policy more than the official advisors who meet with him during the day. The merchant who provides loans to nobles may control them more effectively than any king. Reading these invisible currents requires patience and careful observation. You must watch not just what people do, but when they do it, how they do it, and who they do it with. You must notice who seeks whose approval, who defers to whom, who changes their behavior in whose presence. You must identify who really makes decisions and who merely announces them. I learn that the most powerful people are often those who appear to have no power at all. The humble advisor who is consulted before every major decision wields more influence than the proud official who is only informed after decisions are made. The quiet courtier who is trusted with secrets holds more leverage than the dramatic politician who commands attention. This understanding transformed how I approached every interaction. Instead of trying to impress people with my authority, I learned to appeal to their hidden motivations. Instead of demanding compliance, I learned to make compliance seem like their own idea. Instead of fighting against existing power structures, I learned to work through them in ways that served my purposes while strengthening my position within them. My master's chess set, carved from jade and obsidian, taught me that people are not unlike chess pieces, each with their own capabilities, limitations, and optimal positions. But unlike chess, the game of influence allows you to transform pawns into queens and queens into pawns, depending on how skillfully you position them. This chess set became my meditation on the architecture of influence. I learned to see every person as having a specific role they could play in my larger strategy. The ambitious young officer could be positioned to challenge a rival I wanted weakened. The insecure administrator could be given responsibilities that would make him dependent on my support. The proud veteran could be honored in ways that would make him protective of my interests. Each person became a piece in a complex game that most of them did not even realize they were playing. The art of making others believe your ideas are their own requires delicate architecture. You cannot simply plant an idea in someone's mind and expect them to accept it. You must create the conditions that make your idea seem like the natural, obvious solution to their problems. This requires understanding not just what they want, but how they think and what kinds of reasoning they find compelling. I developed a method for introducing ideas gradually. First, I would present a problem that needed solving, but I would not offer any solutions. I would let them struggle with the problem until they were frustrated and ready for help. Then I would ask questions that would guide their thinking in the direction I wanted them to go. Finally, I would provide just enough additional information to help them reach the conclusion I had intended from the beginning. The beauty of this approach is that people become invested in ideas they believe they have discovered themselves. They will defend these ideas more vigorously than they would defend ideas that were obviously given to them. They will implement these ideas more thoroughly because they feel ownership of them. They will even improve upon these ideas in ways that serve your purposes better than your original conception. Building influence networks proved more powerful than building authority structures. Authority can be challenged, transferred, or revoked. Influence, properly built, becomes self-sustaining. When you have influenced someone to make a decision, they have reasons to continue supporting that decision. When you have helped someone achieve success, they have reasons to continue working with you. When you have made someone feel valued and important, they have reasons to continue seeking your approval. I created multiple pathways to the same outcome, because depending on a single path makes you vulnerable. If your only route to success requires the cooperation of one specific person, that person holds power over you. But if you have arranged 3 different ways to achieve your goal, each involving different people with different motivations, you have created redundancy that makes your success almost inevitable. The invisible architecture that supports all lasting control is built on mutual benefit. People will support you consistently only if they believe that supporting you serves their own interests. This means you must structure your influence networks so that helping you helps them and hurting you hurts them. You must make yourself valuable to others in ways that make them want to protect and enhance your position. I learned to position myself as the person who could solve problems that others could not solve. I cultivated skills and knowledge that made me indispensable. I built relationships that gave me access to information and resources that others needed. I positioned myself at the intersection of multiple networks, making myself the natural bridge between different groups and interests. The master's chess set reminded me that every piece has value, but the value of each piece depends on its position relative to other pieces. A pawn in the right position can be more valuable than a queen in the wrong position. A person with modest abilities in a strategic position can wield more influence than a person with great abilities in an irrelevant position. The architecture of influence is about positioning people, including yourself, where they can have maximum impact on the outcomes that matter to you. The waiting stone, smooth from centuries of handling, taught me perhaps the most difficult lesson of invisible influence, the power of perfect timing. This simple meditation stone became my reminder that rushing for visible results destroys the very influence you seek to build. Strategic patience is not passive waiting. It is active preparation for the moment when action will have maximum impact. I learned this lesson through painful experience. Early in my career, I would plant seeds of influence and then immediately look for signs of growth. I would introduce an idea to someone and then push for immediate implementation. I would create an opportunity for someone and then expect instant gratitude and loyalty. This impatience not only failed to accelerate my progress, it actually undermined it. People become suspicious when you seem too eager for them to adopt your suggestions. They resist when they feel pushed toward decisions they are not ready to make. They withdraw when they sense that your kindness comes with immediate expectations attached. Impatience signals that you need something from them more than they need something from you, which immediately weakens your position. The waiting stone taught me to plant seeds that would grow into predetermined outcomes, but to allow them the time they needed to mature naturally. When I wanted someone to take a particular action, I would create the conditions that would eventually make that action seem like their best choice. But I would not push for immediate decisions. I would wait until circumstances aligned to make my desired outcome feel urgent and necessary to them. This required me to think in much longer time horizons than most people consider. While others focused on immediate results, I planned campaigns that would unfold over months or years. I learned to set multiple forces in motion simultaneously, knowing that they would converge at a predetermined moment to create opportunities that would appear to be fortunate coincidences. The discipline of waiting for the perfect moment to act became one of my greatest strengths. I learned to recognize when someone was ready to hear a particular idea, when a group was ready for change, when an opponent was vulnerable to a specific kind of pressure. Acting too early wastes the opportunity. Acting too late means someone else may have already seized it. But acting at precisely the right moment makes success seem effortless. My method for maintaining control, while appearing to do nothing required sophisticated understanding of natural rhythms and cycles. Just as farmers know when to plant and when to harvest, strategists must know when to advance and when to wait. There are seasons for building relationships, seasons for testing loyalties, seasons for making requests, and seasons for collecting on obligations. I developed the ability to appear completely inactive, while actually orchestrating complex sequences of events. To outside observers, I might seem to be doing nothing while actually coordinating the actions of dozens of people across multiple locations. The art was in making my involvement invisible, while ensuring that all the moving pieces would arrive at the right places at the right times. Strategic patience also means accepting that your greatest victories will be the ones where your role remains completely hidden. When everything unfolds exactly as you planned but appears to have happened through natural causes or other people's decisions, you have achieved the highest form of strategic success. The temptation to claim credit for these victories is strong, but claiming credit destroys the very invisibility that made the victory possible. The waiting stone reminded me that patience is not just a tactical consideration. It is the ultimate weapon of invisible power. Those who cannot wait will always be vulnerable to those who can. Those who need immediate results will always be weaker than those who can delay gratification in service of larger goals. Those who reveal their impatience reveal their desperation, and desperation is always a weakness that can be exploited. Patience allows you to wait for your opponents to make mistakes while you maintain perfect position. It allows you to let situations develop until they favor your interests. It allows you to build influence slowly and invisibly until you have reached a position where you cannot be dislodged. The spy's hollow reed, an ingenious communication device used by my intelligence network, represented my understanding that information is the ultimate currency of power. This simple bamboo tube, designed to carry messages invisibly, taught me that controlling information flow is more powerful than controlling people directly. Knowledge that others do not possess or do not know you possess becomes leverage that can be applied with surgical precision. I built networks that brought me information before anyone else had access to it. These networks were not just formal spy rings, though those existed. More importantly, they were webs of relationships with people who naturally encountered valuable information in their daily activities. The merchant who traveled between cities brought news of economic conditions. The servant who cleaned meeting rooms overheard strategic discussions. The scribe who copied official documents knew policy changes before they were announced. The key to building effective information networks is understanding that most people do not realize the value of what they know. A casual comment about which officials have been meeting privately might seem like harmless gossip to the person sharing it, but to someone who understands the larger political landscape, it reveals shifting alliances and emerging opportunities. My job was to help people understand that their seemingly insignificant observations could be valuable to me. While never revealing exactly why I found them valuable, I learned to turn information into invisible leverage by knowing what others did not know I knew. When I discovered that a rival general was planning to request additional supplies, I could arrange for delays in the supply chain that would make his campaign impossible. But I would never reveal that I knew about his plans. When I learned that a minister was having financial difficulties, I could arrange for profitable opportunities to come his way in exchange for future cooperation, but I would present these opportunities as fortunate coincidences. The art of knowing what others do not know you know requires careful management of your own reactions and responses. You cannot let your knowledge show in your face, your words, or your actions. You must interact with people naturally while secretly holding information that gives you tremendous advantages over them. This requires constant self-control and strategic thinking about how to use information without revealing that you possess it. My system for making others reveal their plans willingly involved creating environments where people felt safe sharing information that they should have kept secret. I learned to ask questions that seemed innocent but actually gathered intelligence. I learned to create conversations where people would volunteer information to demonstrate their own importance or knowledge. I learned to make people feel comfortable enough to speak freely while never appearing to be gathering information systematically. Controlling information flow proved more powerful than controlling people because it allowed me to shape reality itself. When you control what information reaches which people at what times, you control how they understand their situations and what options they believe are available to them. You can make allies appear to be enemies and enemies appear to be allies, simply by controlling what each side knows about the other. I discovered that information has different values depending on timing. The same piece of information might be worthless if revealed too early, devastating if revealed at the wrong moment, or incredibly valuable if revealed at precisely the right time. Learning to time the release of information became as important as gathering it in the first place. The spy's hollow reed also taught me the importance of protecting my own information while gathering intelligence about others. I developed methods for communicating sensitive information that could not be intercepted or decoded. I created multiple channels for important messages so that if one was compromised, others would still function. I learned to compartmentalize information so that no single person in my network knew enough to compromise the entire operation. Most importantly, I learned that the person who controls information flow controls the narrative. People make decisions based on the information available to them. If you can influence what information they receive and how they interpret it, you can influence their decisions without them ever realizing they are being influenced. This is perhaps the most subtle and powerful form of control possible, shaping reality itself through the careful management of knowledge and perception. The Forked Path Scroll, a tactical diagram I treasured above all others, showed how I learned to give enemies choices that all led to my victory. This ancient parchment illustrated one of my most powerful discoveries. People feel empowered when they have choices, even when every choice serves someone else's purposes. The illusion of choice is often more effective than direct command because it eliminates resistance while achieving compliance. I learned this principle during a siege where traditional approaches had failed. Instead of forcing surrender through starvation or assault, I presented the enemy commander with 3 options: surrender with honor and keep his personal wealth, fight to the death and lose everything, or attempt to escape and face pursuit that would destroy his reputation. Each option was carefully crafted to appeal to different aspects of his personality, while ultimately serving my strategic goals. The beauty of this approach lies in understanding human psychology. People resist when they feel their autonomy is threatened, but they cooperate when they feel they are making free choices. By presenting options where every choice serves your purpose, you transform potential resistance into willing cooperation. The person making the choice feels empowered and in control, even though you have actually controlled the outcome by controlling the options. Creating the illusion of freedom while maintaining control requires sophisticated understanding of how people make decisions. Most people choose based on emotion first and justify with logic afterward. They select the option that makes them feel best about themselves and their situation. If you can design choices that make your preferred outcome feel like the most emotionally satisfying option, people will choose it willingly and then find rational reasons to support their decision. I developed a method for presenting options that made people feel empowered while guiding their decisions. First, I would identify what the person truly wanted, not what they claimed to want, but what their actions revealed they valued most. Then I would design choices that made my preferred option appear to be the best path to achieving what they really wanted. Finally, I would present these choices in a way that emphasized their freedom to decide while subtly highlighting the benefits of the option I preferred. The psychology of making others choose your preferred outcome involves understanding their decision-making patterns. Some people always choose the middle option when presented with 3 choices. Others always avoid the most expensive or most risky option. Still others always choose whatever seems most prestigious or most aligned with their self-image. Once you understand someone's decision-making patterns, you can position your preferred choice to align with their natural tendencies. I learned to make people feel that they had discovered the best option themselves, rather than having it recommended to them. This required presenting information in ways that would lead them naturally to the conclusion I wanted them to reach. I would provide facts, create comparisons, and ask questions that would guide their thinking toward my preferred outcome, while making them feel that they had analyzed the situation independently and made their own decision. The forked path scroll reminded me that the most powerful choices are often between good options rather than between good and bad options. When someone must choose between something desirable and something undesirable, they feel manipulated. But when they must choose between multiple desirable options that all serve your purposes, they feel fortunate to have such good choices available. This principle proved especially effective in negotiations and conflicts. Instead of demanding surrender, I would offer choices that made surrender seem like the most attractive option. Instead of threatening punishment, I would present alternatives that made compliance seem like the path to the greatest reward. Instead of forcing decisions, I would create circumstances that made my preferred decisions seem obviously beneficial to everyone involved. The illusion of choice also works because it engages people's problem-solving instincts. When faced with a decision, people naturally analyze options and imagine outcomes. This mental engagement makes them feel invested in whatever choice they make. By controlling the options while allowing them to control the decision process, you gain their commitment to the outcome while maintaining their sense of autonomy and dignity. The covenant ring, a simple band of silver worn on my smallest finger, symbolized my secret alliances with unexpected partners. This unremarkable piece of jewelry reminded me daily that the most powerful partnerships are often the most invisible ones. I learned to build alliances that others never suspected existed, turning potential enemies into unknowing allies and creating networks of mutual benefit that operated entirely beneath the surface of obvious politics. My most effective alliances were with people who appeared to have conflicting interests with mine. A rival general who competed with me for the emperor's favor became one of my most valuable partners when I discovered we both had concerns about a mutual enemy. A merchant who seemed to profit from conditions that disadvantaged my campaigns became an ally when I helped him establish trade routes that served both our purposes. The key was finding the hidden mutual benefits that existed beneath apparent conflicts. I developed a talent for identifying shared interests that neither party had recognized. Two people might see themselves as natural opponents because they competed for the same resources or recognition, but closer analysis might reveal that they faced common threats or could achieve greater success through cooperation than through competition. My role became helping them see these possibilities while positioning myself as the bridge that made cooperation possible. The art of finding mutual benefit in seemingly opposing interests requires deep understanding of what people truly want versus what they think they want. Someone who appears to want to defeat you might actually want respect, security, or recognition. If you can provide those things while advancing your own goals, you can transform an enemy into an ally without them ever feeling that they have compromised their principles or betrayed their interests. My strategy for turning enemies into unknowing allies involved gradual cultivation of common ground. I would begin by identifying small areas where our interests aligned, and then propose limited cooperation that benefited both parties. Success in these small collaborations would build trust and reveal additional opportunities for mutual benefit. Over time, former enemies would become so invested in our partnership that they would actively protect my interests even when I was not directly involved. Building invisible alliances required careful attention to timing and presentation. I could not approach potential allies directly with proposals for secret partnerships. Such approaches would have been seen as suspicious or treacherous. Instead, I had to create circumstances where cooperation would seem like their idea. I would present situations where helping me was obviously in their interest, allow them to propose the partnership, and then graciously accept their suggestions as if I had not orchestrated the entire sequence. The covenant ring reminded me that the strongest alliances are built on genuine mutual benefit rather than on temporary convenience. People will honor commitments that serve their long-term interests, even when honoring those commitments becomes temporarily difficult or costly. But they will abandon partnerships that only served short-term advantages as soon as those advantages disappear or better opportunities arise. I learned to make myself valuable to others in ways that made them want to protect and enhance my position. This was not simply a matter of doing favors or providing benefits. It required becoming integral to their success in ways that made my failure threaten their interests. When people's prosperity depends partly on your continued success, they become natural allies even if they do not consider themselves your partners. Secret partnerships proved especially powerful because they allowed me to coordinate actions across seemingly unconnected networks. An action taken by one ally in one context could support an initiative by another ally in a completely different context, with neither ally knowing about the other's involvement. This created the appearance of fortunate coincidences while actually representing carefully orchestrated campaigns. The most sophisticated, invisible alliances were those where the partners served my interests while believing they were serving their own, and technically, they were right. The goal was never to exploit people or trick them into serving my purposes at their expense. Instead, it was to identify situations where their success and my success were genuinely connected, and then to make those connections strong enough that supporting me became their natural choice rather than something I had to request or demand. The broken sword, deliberately damaged but still razor-sharp beneath its scarred surface, became my meditation on one of the most counterintuitive principles of strategic control. Appearing weak while being strong is the ultimate advantage. This weapon, which looked worthless to enemies but remained deadly in skilled hands, taught me that perceived weakness could be transformed into devastating strength through proper application. I learned this lesson during a campaign where I was genuinely outnumbered and appeared to be facing certain defeat. Traditional wisdom suggested that I should demonstrate strength to discourage enemy attacks and maintain morale among my troops. Instead, I chose to exaggerate my apparent weakness while secretly strengthening my actual position. I allowed intelligence about my supposed disadvantages to reach my enemies, while concealing my true capabilities and preparations. The result exceeded my greatest expectations. My enemies, convinced of their overwhelming superiority, became careless in their planning and execution. They divided their forces unnecessarily, assuming that any part of their army could easily defeat my entire force. They neglected defensive precautions because they believed I posed no real threat. They revealed their strategies openly because they saw no need for secrecy against such a weak opponent. Meanwhile, I used their overconfidence to my advantage. While they were celebrating their anticipated victory, I was studying their exposed positions and identifying vulnerabilities they had created through their carelessness. While they were planning victory parades, I was positioning my forces for surgical strikes that would exploit their assumptions about my limitations. The broken sword reminded me that enemies who underestimate you have already given you half the victory. The art of making others overconfident in their position requires careful balance. You must appear weak enough to make them careless, but not so weak that they decide you are not worth their attention. You must seem vulnerable enough to make them aggressive, but not so vulnerable that they can destroy you before you can implement your strategy. The goal is to encourage mistakes, not to invite annihilation. My method for encouraging enemies to make mistakes by feeling superior involved presenting them with apparent opportunities that were actually traps. I would position forces in ways that seemed to expose critical weaknesses while actually preparing counterattacks that would punish anyone who tried to exploit those apparent weaknesses. I would make requests for assistance that seemed desperate while actually gathering intelligence about potential allies and enemies. Vulnerability became my greatest strategic weapon because it disarmed suspicion and encouraged revelation. People guard their secrets carefully around those they perceive as threats, but they speak freely around those they see as harmless. When others believed I was weak and struggling, they would often share information, offer advice, or make comments that revealed their own plans and vulnerabilities. The broken sword also taught me that the secret of winning by losing in ways that do not matter requires understanding the difference between tactical defeats and strategic victories. I learned to accept small losses that would create larger opportunities. I would allow enemies to win battles that actually weakened their position for the war. I would concede points in negotiations that seemed important to them but were actually irrelevant to my real objectives. This approach proved especially effective in court politics, where appearing too successful too quickly could attract dangerous attention from powerful rivals. By maintaining a modest profile while building real influence, I could accumulate power without triggering defensive reactions from those who might have felt threatened by more obvious success. The broken sword reminded me that the most dangerous predator is often the one that appears least threatening. Perceived weakness also provided perfect cover for gathering intelligence and building alliances. People would share information with me that they would never have shared with someone they perceived as a potential threat. They would offer assistance and cooperation because helping someone weak made them feel generous and important. They would reveal their own insecurities and fears because they felt safe being vulnerable around someone who appeared to pose no danger. The ultimate power of perceived weakness lies in its ability to position you perfectly for surprise reversals. When everyone believes you are weak, they do not prepare for your strength. When they expect defeat from you, victory becomes shocking and devastating. The broken sword taught me that the moment when others are most confident in their superiority over you is often the perfect moment to reveal your true capabilities and transform apparent weakness into undeniable strength. The Terrain Master's compass, an intricate instrument that helped me shape battlefields to my advantage, taught me that controlling context is more powerful than controlling content. This compass pointed not just to magnetic north, but to strategic understanding. The environment shapes behavior more profoundly than direct persuasion ever could. I learned to create conditions that would naturally lead to the outcomes I desired, making the setting itself do the work of influence. My first insight into environmental control came during a siege where traditional approaches had failed. Instead of trying to convince the defenders to surrender through negotiations or threats, I focused on changing the conditions they faced. I diverted their water supply, disrupted their food deliveries, and created circumstances where continuing to resist became increasingly uncomfortable, while surrendering became increasingly attractive. I let the environment make my arguments for me. This principle proved far more powerful than I had initially realized. People adapt their behavior to their circumstances automatically and unconsciously. When you change someone's environment, you change their options, their priorities, and eventually their decisions. They will often make choices they would never have considered in different circumstances, and they will make these choices willingly because they seem like natural responses to their situation. I learned to shape environments subtly, making changes that influenced behavior without announcing their purpose. If I wanted people to feel rushed and make hasty decisions, I would create time pressures through scheduling and deadlines. If I wanted them to feel generous and cooperative, I would arrange meetings in comfortable settings with abundant refreshments. If I wanted them to feel competitive and ambitious, I would create visible comparisons and public recognition opportunities. The art of creating conditions that naturally lead to desired outcomes requires understanding the psychological impact of physical and social environments. Formal settings encourage formal behavior. Casual settings encourage informal communication. Competitive environments bring out aggressive instincts. Collaborative environments promote cooperative behavior. By choosing and shaping the setting, I could influence the tone and outcome of any interaction. My method for making the setting do the work of persuasion involved careful attention to details that most people notice subconsciously but not consciously. The arrangement of seating in a meeting could determine who felt included and who felt excluded. The timing of events could influence whether people felt pressured or relaxed. The presence or absence of certain symbols, decorations, or other environmental cues could prime people to think and behave in specific ways. Environmental control proved especially effective because it bypassed conscious resistance. When you try to persuade someone directly, they naturally evaluate your arguments and may reject them. But when you influence their environment, they respond to the changed conditions without necessarily realizing that those conditions were deliberately created. Their responses feel like their own natural reactions, rather than compliance with external influence. The terrain master's compass reminded me that invisible environmental influences are often more powerful than visible ones. The temperature of a room affects mood and decision-making. The amount of light influences energy and optimism. The presence of certain sounds or smells can trigger unconscious associations and memories. By controlling these subtle factors, I could influence people's emotional states and mental processes without them ever realizing what was happening. I discovered that controlling context was more lasting than controlling content, because environmental influences shape thinking patterns over time. A person who makes one decision in response to carefully crafted circumstances is likely to make similar decisions when faced with similar circumstances in the future. Environmental conditioning creates behavioral habits that persist even after the original environmental influences are removed. The most sophisticated environmental control involved creating conditions where multiple people would naturally reach the same conclusions independently. Instead of trying to convince a group to adopt a particular viewpoint, I would arrange circumstances that made that viewpoint seem obviously correct to everyone involved. When people discover the same truth through their own experience and observation, they become united in their understanding without anyone having to persuade them. This approach eliminated the resistance that often emerges when people feel they are being manipulated or coerced. When the environment itself teaches the lessons you want people to learn, they accept those lessons as reality rather than as someone else's opinion. The terrain master's compass taught me that the most powerful influence is the kind that people never realize is happening, the influence that feels like natural consequence rather than deliberate intervention. The magician's cloak, a garment that seemed ordinary but concealed countless hidden pockets and secret mechanisms, became my teacher in the art of misdirection. This cloak showed me that the greatest strategic advantage comes not from hiding your actions, but from directing attention toward the wrong actions, while you accomplish your real objectives elsewhere. Misdirection is more elegant than deception because it uses truth to conceal truth. I mastered this art during a campaign where I needed to move a large force without alerting enemy scouts. Traditional approaches would have involved night marches or hidden routes, but these create obvious signs of concealment that alert careful observers. Instead, I created a highly visible military exercise in one location, while quietly moving my real forces through a completely different area. The visible activity was genuine military training, so no deception was involved, but it drew all attention away from my actual strategic movement. The strategy of creating obvious distractions while executing hidden plans requires understanding what naturally draws human attention. People focus on movement, unusual events, apparent conflicts, visible displays of wealth or power, and anything that seems to threaten or benefit them directly. By providing these attention-grabbing elements in areas where they would not interfere with my real objectives, I could ensure that observers would look where I wanted them to look rather than where I needed them not to look. My method for using others' assumptions against them involved understanding their expectations and then providing evidence that seemed to confirm those expectations while actually preparing for completely different outcomes. If enemies expected me to attack their strongest position, I would make preparations that appeared to support that assumption while actually preparing to strike where they were weakest. If allies expected me to request certain types of assistance, I would ask for exactly what they expected while secretly arranging alternative sources for what I actually needed. Misdirection proved more elegant than deception because it preserved trust while achieving strategic advantage. When you lie to people and they discover the truth, they lose confidence in everything you tell them afterward. But when you simply direct their attention toward true but irrelevant information while keeping relevant information private, you maintain credibility while achieving your objectives. The magician's cloak reminded me that the best misdirection feels helpful rather than manipulative. I learned to hide in plain sight, while others searched for complexity and conspiracy. Often, the most effective way to conceal your true intentions is to announce them openly in contexts where people will not believe you are being serious. I would discuss my real plans at social gatherings, presenting them as theoretical possibilities or amusing speculation. People would remember these conversations as entertainment rather than intelligence, allowing me to share accurate information without revealing that it was accurate. The art of directing attention away from your true intentions requires understanding the difference between what is interesting and what is important. Something can be genuinely fascinating and completely irrelevant to your actual objectives. By providing interesting information about irrelevant topics, you can satisfy people's curiosity while keeping their attention away from the important information they should be seeking. The magician's cloak also taught me that the most effective misdirection involves multiple layers of distraction. While obvious misdirection might fool casual observers, sophisticated opponents require more complex approaches. I learned to create primary distractions that would fool most people, secondary distractions that would fool those who saw through the primary ones, and tertiary distractions for the few who might penetrate both earlier layers. This ensured that even the most astute observers would eventually focus their attention on something other than my real activities. The dance of misdirection became a fundamental part of my strategic thinking. Every action I took in public was chosen partly for its misdirection value, not because it was deceptive, but because it naturally drew attention towards some aspects of my situation while drawing attention away from others. The magician's cloak reminded me that successful misdirection requires you to give people something genuine and interesting to focus on, not simply to hide what you do not want them to see. The mind map scroll, my detailed study of how different personality types could be influenced and controlled, revealed that psychological positioning is more lasting than physical positioning. This ancient document, covered with careful observations about human nature, taught me that the most important battlefield is the one inside people's minds. When you position ideas correctly in someone's thinking, you shape their reality in ways that outlast any external manipulation. I learned to position ideas in people's minds before they realized the ideas were there. This required understanding how people process new information and integrate it with their existing beliefs. Most people do not simply accept or reject new ideas, they modify them to fit their existing mental frameworks. By understanding someone's framework, I could present ideas in forms that would be naturally accepted and integrated, even when those ideas might have been rejected if presented differently. The art of making others psychologically dependent on your presence involves becoming associated with their success, security, or self-image in ways that make your absence feel threatening or uncomfortable. This is not manipulation through fear, it is positioning through value. When people genuinely benefit from your involvement in their lives, they naturally want to maintain that involvement. The key is making your contributions so valuable that losing them would represent a significant cost. My method for becoming indispensable without appearing to try required careful attention to the difference between being helpful and being necessary. Anyone can be helpful by providing obvious services or solving immediate problems, but becoming necessary requires understanding the deeper needs and insecurities that drive someone's behavior, and then positioning yourself as the person who addresses those underlying concerns. I discovered that psychological positioning is more lasting than physical positioning because it becomes part of how people think about themselves and their world. When you have successfully positioned yourself in someone's mind as trustworthy, competent, or valuable, that positioning influences every subsequent interaction. They interpret your actions through the filter of their established perception, giving you the benefit of doubt and attributing positive motivations to ambiguous behaviors. The mind map scroll showed me that different personality types require different approaches to psychological positioning. Ambitious people needed to see me as someone who could accelerate their progress toward their goals. Insecure people needed to see me as someone who provided stability and reassurance. Proud people needed to see me as someone who recognized and enhanced their status. Analytical people needed to see me as someone who provided valuable information and insights. The secret of making others need you while believing they chose you lies in understanding the difference between dependence and preference. People resist relationships that make them feel dependent or controlled, but they embrace relationships that feel like natural preferences. By providing value in ways that feel chosen rather than imposed, you can create strong psychological bonds without triggering defensive reactions. I learned to position myself in people's minds as the person who understood them better than others. Did this require careful observation and genuine interest in their perspectives, concerns, and aspirations? When people feel truly understood, they naturally gravitate toward the person who provides that understanding. This positioning becomes especially powerful because it addresses one of the deepest human needs, the need to be seen and valued for who you really are. Psychological positioning also involved helping people achieve better versions of themselves. When your presence in someone's life consistently leads to positive outcomes for them, better decisions, improved performance, enhanced reputation. They begin to associate you with their own success. This creates a powerful psychological bond because you become connected to their most positive self-image. The most sophisticated psychological positioning involved becoming part of how people thought about complex problems and decisions. Instead of positioning myself as someone who provided answers, I positioned myself as someone who helped them think more clearly and effectively. This made my involvement feel empowering rather than dependent, but it also made them naturally turn to me whenever they faced difficult decisions or challenging situations. The mind map scroll reminded me that psychological positioning requires authenticity to be sustainable. People eventually recognize and resent false positioning, but they embrace and protect authentic value. The goal was never to trick people into needing me, but to genuinely become someone whose presence improved their lives in meaningful ways. The celestial calendar, an ancient instrument that helped me synchronize my actions with natural rhythms and human patterns, taught me that timing can make the difference between success and failure in any endeavor. This intricate device tracked not just astronomical events, but the invisible cycles that govern human behavior and social dynamics. I learned that acting when others are distracted or vulnerable multiplies the effectiveness of any strategy. My understanding of timing began with observing natural patterns in human behavior. People are more receptive to new ideas at certain times of day, certain days of the week, certain seasons of the year. They are more likely to make generous decisions when they feel secure and successful. They are more open to taking risks when they feel confident. They are more willing to consider changes when they are dissatisfied with current conditions. The celestial calendar helped me identify these optimal moments for action. I discovered that the most powerful actions often appear coincidental, but are carefully planned to synchronize with existing circumstances. When you time your moves to align with natural cycles and human patterns, your actions feel like natural consequences rather than deliberate interventions. People accept these actions more readily because they seem to emerge organically from the people situation rather than being imposed from outside. The art of acting when others are distracted or vulnerable requires understanding what creates distraction and vulnerability in different types of people. Major events, celebrations, crises, transitions, competitions naturally draw attention and emotional energy away from routine vigilance. During these periods, people are less likely to notice subtle influences or question unexpected opportunities. The celestial calendar taught me to recognize these windows of reduced awareness and position my actions accordingly. My method for making moves that appear coincidental but are carefully planned involved extensive preparation combined with patient waiting for optimal conditions. I would identify what I wanted to accomplish, prepare everything necessary to accomplish it, and then wait for circumstances that would make my actions seem natural and inevitable. This approach required tremendous discipline because optimal timing might not arrive for months or even years. The secret rhythms that govern human behavior operate on multiple timescales simultaneously. Some patterns repeat daily. People are generally more optimistic in the morning and more reflective in the evening. Some patterns repeat. Weekly decision-making tends to be more conservative early in the week and more adventurous later. Some patterns repeat. Seasonally, people are more open to new beginnings in spring and more focused on completion in autumn. I learned to layer my timing across multiple rhythms to maximize impact. An action timed to coincide with someone's daily peak energy during their weekly risk-taking period in their seasonal phase of openness to change, and during a period of reduced attention to potential threats, would have dramatically greater effect than the same action taken at a less optimal time. The celestial calendar also revealed the importance of understanding personal rhythms as well as general patterns. Each individual has their own cycles of confidence and insecurity, optimism and pessimism, openness and defensiveness. By observing these personal patterns carefully, I could time my interactions with specific people to coincide with their most receptive moments. A request made during someone's confident phase would receive a different response than the same request made during their insecure phase. Timing also applies to the sequence of actions within longer campaigns. The order in which you introduce ideas, make requests, provide benefits, or apply pressure can determine whether your overall strategy succeeds or fails. People need time to process new information and adjust their thinking. Rushing the sequence often creates resistance, while allowing proper time for each phase to develop naturally creates momentum that makes later phases easier. The most sophisticated timing involved creating conditions where multiple people would be ready for the same action simultaneously. This required understanding not just individual rhythms, but group dynamics and collective patterns. When you can synchronize your actions with moments when multiple key people are all in receptive states, you can accomplish changes that would be impossible to achieve by working with individuals separately. The celestial calendar reminded me that perfect timing often means doing nothing until the moment is right, and then acting decisively when optimal conditions finally align. The patience required for this approach is enormous, but the results justify the wait. The puppet master's strings, invisible threads that represented my ability to guide without controlling, taught me that micromanagement destroys the very control you are trying to maintain. These delicate filaments, strong enough to guide movement, but light enough to remain unnoticed, showed me how to influence outcomes without constant intervention. The secret lies in creating systems that maintain control automatically while preserving the illusion, often the reality of independence. I learned this principle through painful experience with a talented but independent-minded general. My initial attempts to control his actions through detailed orders and frequent oversight created resentment and resistance. The more I tried to direct his every move, the more creative he became in finding ways to circumvent my instructions. While technically following them, I was spending enormous energy trying to control someone who was becoming increasingly determined to prove his autonomy. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to control his actions and instead focused on controlling his options and information. I arranged for him to receive intelligence that would naturally lead him to make the decisions I preferred. I created circumstances where the choices that best served my strategic goals also appeared to best serve his personal interests and professional reputation. The result was remarkable. He began implementing my strategies more effectively than when I had tried to force compliance. The art of setting systems that maintain control automatically requires understanding the difference between controlling inputs and controlling outputs. Most people focus on controlling what others do, but it is often more effective to control the conditions that determine what others will want to do. When you shape someone's environment, information, incentives, and options properly, they will naturally choose actions that serve your purposes without feeling controlled or manipulated. My method for creating self-sustaining influence involved building momentum that would continue working in my absence. This required identifying the key factors that drove behavior in each situation and then establishing routines, relationships, and reward systems that would perpetuate desired behaviors automatically, like a water wheel that continues turning as long as the stream flows. These systems maintained their influence without requiring constant attention. I discovered that micromanagement destroys control because it eliminates the psychological ownership that makes people committed to outcomes. When someone feels that they are merely implementing your detailed instructions, they have no investment in success beyond avoiding your displeasure. But when they feel that they have developed their own approach to achieving goals you have established, they become personally committed to proving that their approach works. The puppet master's strings reminded me that the most effective control is often the kind that people do not realize exists. When your influence operates through natural consequences, logical incentives, and voluntary choices, people experience freedom while you maintain direction. They feel empowered and autonomous while actually following paths you have carefully prepared for them. Building influence that grows stronger the less you use it requires understanding the psychology of trust and competence. When you consistently refrain from interfering in situations where you could interfere, people begin to trust your judgment about when intervention is truly necessary. When you demonstrate confidence in their abilities by giving them autonomy, they often rise to meet your expectations and prove worthy of that confidence. I learned to position myself as a resource rather than a supervisor. Instead of telling people what to do, I made myself available to help them figure out what to do. Instead of monitoring their every action, I created reporting systems that kept me informed while allowing them to manage their own activities. Instead of punishing mistakes, I helped people learn from failures in ways that made them less likely to repeat errors. The secret of maintaining control while encouraging initiative lies in establishing clear boundaries and principles while allowing flexibility in methods and tactics. When people understand what outcomes are required and what constraints must be respected, they can be remarkably creative and effective in developing their own approaches. This creativity often produces better results than rigid adherence to predetermined plans. The most sophisticated form of automatic control involved creating cultures and environments where desired behaviors became natural and expected. When you establish norms, values, and social pressures that consistently encourage certain types of actions and discourage others, you create self-regulating systems that maintain themselves through peer influence rather than hierarchical control. Puppet master's strings taught me that true mastery lies not in pulling strings constantly, but in arranging circumstances so that others pull the strings you want pulled, when you want them pulled, for reasons they find compelling and satisfying. The moral compass, a personal talisman that reminded me of the responsibility that comes with invisible influence, forced me to grapple with the most challenging aspect of strategic control: the ethical implications of power that others cannot see or understand. This simple instrument, no larger than my palm, pointed not toward magnetic north, but toward moral truth, the recognition that invisible power requires higher ethical standards than visible power. My understanding of these ethical challenges developed gradually as my abilities in invisible influence grew more sophisticated. In the beginning, I was primarily concerned with effectiveness. Did my strategies work? Did they achieve my objectives? Did they give me the advantages I sought? But as I became more skilled and my influence expanded, I began to recognize the profound responsibility that comes with the ability to shape others' lives in ways they do not understand. The fundamental ethical challenge of invisible power is that people cannot give informed consent to influences they do not recognize. When someone makes a decision based on information you have carefully controlled or circumstances you have deliberately arranged, to what extent is that decision truly their own? This question haunted me as I realized that my most successful strategies were also my most ethically complex ones. We developed a personal code for using influence ethically and purposefully, based on the principle that invisible power must serve larger goods beyond personal advantage. The moral compass reminded me daily that the ability to control others invisibly comes with the obligation to exercise that control in ways that ultimately benefit those being influenced, not just those doing the influencing. My first ethical principle was transparency of outcomes, if not transparency of methods. While I might not reveal exactly how I was achieving certain results, I committed to being honest about what results I was seeking and why those results would be beneficial. People had the right to know what I was trying to accomplish, even if They did not know exactly how I was accomplishing it. The second principle was mutual benefit. I refused to use invisible influence in ways that would harm those being influenced, even if such influence would provide advantages to me. Every strategy had to be designed so that success would benefit all parties involved, not just advance my own interests at others' expense. This principle required me to think carefully about long-term consequences and unintended effects. The third principle was proportionality. The degree of invisible influence I exercised had to be proportional to the importance of the outcomes I was seeking. Minor objectives did not justify major manipulations of others' circumstances or perceptions. The more significant the influence, the more significant the justification had to be. Why invisible power requires higher moral standards than visible power became clear through experience. Visible power can be challenged, questioned, and resisted. When people know they are being influenced, they can evaluate that influence and decide whether to accept or reject it. But invisible power operates without their knowledge or consent, making it far more difficult for them to protect their own interests or exercise their own judgment. The responsibility that comes with shaping others' destinies without their knowledge is enormous. Every decision you make about how to exercise invisible influence potentially affects the course of someone else's life in ways they may never understand. The person who fails to get a promotion because you influenced the selection process may never know why their career stalled. The person who makes a beneficial decision because you shaped their information may never know how close they came to making a harmful choice. The secret of maintaining integrity while wielding influence. Others cannot see lies in subjecting yourself to standards that others cannot enforce. Since people cannot hold you accountable for influences they do not recognize, you must hold yourself accountable through internal ethical frameworks and personal principles that operate regardless of external oversight. I learned to ask myself difficult questions about every use of invisible influence. Would I be comfortable if everyone affected knew exactly what I was doing and why? Would I be willing to have my methods used against me in similar circumstances? Would the outcomes I am seeking be seen as beneficial by impartial observers who understood all the consequences? The moral compass also taught me that ethical, invisible influence requires accepting limits on your own power. There are things you could accomplish through invisible influence that you should not accomplish, regardless of how beneficial the outcomes might appear. The ability to influence others invisibly must be balanced by the wisdom to recognize when such influence would be inappropriate, excessive, or harmful. The most challenging ethical questions arose when invisible influence could prevent harm or produce significant benefits. Was it ethical to manipulate someone's circumstances to prevent them from making a decision that would damage their life? Was it acceptable to influence a group's dynamics to achieve an outcome that everyone would eventually recognize as beneficial? These situations required careful consideration of competing ethical principles and long-term consequences. The bridge of time, a symbolic connection between ancient wisdom and modern application, showed me that my principles translate perfectly to contemporary workplace dynamics. This bridge, spanning millennia, demonstrated that while the tools and contexts have changed dramatically, the fundamental patterns of human behavior and the principles of invisible influence remain constant. The same strategies that won ancient battles can win modern professional conflicts. My principles translate seamlessly to modern workplace dynamics because the core challenges remain unchanged. People still compete for limited resources and recognition. They still form alliances and rivalries based on perceived interests and personal chemistry. They still respond predictably to certain types of incentives and pressures. They still make decisions based on incomplete information and emotional reactions as much as logical analysis. The art of invisible influence in digital communication and virtual teams requires adapting ancient principles to new mediums. In virtual environments, traditional indicators of status, mood, and intention are often absent, making it more challenging to read people accurately. However, digital communication also creates new opportunities for influence through careful timing of messages, strategic use of different communication channels, and subtle influence on information flow and group dynamics. I discovered that email timing can be as strategically important as face-to-face timing was in my era. Messages sent at certain times of day or week receive different levels of attention and generate different emotional responses. A request sent when someone is likely to be feeling productive and optimistic will receive a more favorable response than the same request sent when they are likely to be feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Virtual meetings create unique opportunities for environmental control through technology. The person who controls screen sharing, meeting, recording, or participant management wields significant influence over group dynamics and outcomes. Similarly, the strategic use of private chat functions, breakout rooms, and other virtual meeting features can shape discussions and build alliances in ways that are invisible to most participants. My strategies adapted for contemporary leadership involve understanding that modern influence often operates through networks rather than hierarchies. In today's flatter organizational structures, the ability to influence across departments, teams, and reporting relationships becomes more valuable than traditional command authority. The ancient art of building invisible alliances translates directly to modern matrix organizations and cross-functional collaboration. Digital platforms have created new opportunities for information, control, and misdirection. Social media, internal communication platforms, and project management systems generate enormous amounts of data about preferences, relationships, and priorities. Those who understand how to read these digital signals gain advantages similar to those I gained from reading physical signals in ancient times. The principle of creating multiple pathways to the same outcome becomes especially important in complex, modern organizations where single points of failure can derail entire initiatives. By building support across different departments, establishing relationships with multiple decision makers, and creating various justifications for the same objective, you can ensure that temporary setbacks in one area do not eliminate your overall progress. Why ancient wisdom is more relevant than ever in complex modern systems relates to the acceleration of change and the proliferation of information. In environments where everyone is overwhelmed by data and demands on their attention, the ability to cut through noise and focus on essential patterns becomes invaluable. The principles I developed for reading human nature and predicting behavior provide frameworks for understanding complex, modern dynamics. Modern technology amplifies both the opportunities and the risks of invisible influence. Digital tools can extend your reach and sophistication far beyond what was possible in ancient times. But they also create permanent records and enable surveillance that make completely invisible action more difficult. The key is understanding how to leverage technological capabilities while respecting new constraints and ethical considerations. The secret of applying timeless principles to rapidly changing environments lies in distinguishing between superficial changes and fundamental constants. The specific tools, communication methods, and organizational structures may evolve rapidly, but the underlying patterns of human motivation, social dynamics, and strategic thinking remain remarkably stable across cultures and centuries. Contemporary applications require understanding that modern professionals are generally more educated and sophisticated than ancient populations, making crude manipulation techniques ineffective and counterproductive. Success requires more subtle approaches that respect people's intelligence, while still leveraging psychological and social principles that operate below the level of conscious awareness. The bridge of time reminded me that the greatest advantage of ancient wisdom in modern contexts is perspective. While others focus on immediate tactical responses to current challenges, understanding timeless principles allows you to recognize patterns and opportunities that others miss, to maintain strategic focus amid tactical confusion, and to respond to change with confidence based on deep understanding rather than reactive improvisation. The student's empty cup, a simple vessel representing readiness to receive and apply wisdom, sits before you now as it once sat before me. This cup, empty and waiting, symbolizes the beginning of your journey toward invisible mastery. Everything I have shared with you, every principle, every technique, every hard-won insight, nothing until you begin applying it in your own environment with your own challenges and opportunities. How to begin developing your own invisible influence immediately starts with observation and patience. Before you attempt to influence others, you must first learn to see the invisible currents that already shape behavior around you. Spend the next week simply watching and noting patterns. Who really makes decisions in your organization? Who influences whom? What unofficial alliances exist? What unspoken rules govern interactions? This observation phase is crucial because you cannot effectively influence systems you do not understand. The first steps toward mastering strategic control involve starting small and building gradually. Choose one person whose behavior you would like to influence in a minor way. Perhaps you want a colleague to be more responsive to your emails, or you want your supervisor to give you more interesting assignments. Apply one principle at a time, perhaps information control by sharing valuable insights at optimal moments, or environmental influence by suggesting meetings in settings that favor your objectives. As you practice these techniques, pay careful attention to the ethics of your approach. My personal advice for maintaining ethical standards while gaining power is to always ensure that your influence serves others' genuine interests as well as your own. The most sustainable, invisible influence is that which creates value for everyone involved. When people benefit from your influence, even if they do not recognize it, you build a foundation for long-term success rather than short-term advantage. Remember that the journey toward invisible mastery is lifelong and ever-evolving. Each situation will teach you something new about human nature, strategic timing, or the subtle dynamics of influence. Each success will reveal new possibilities, and each failure will provide valuable lessons about the limits and appropriate applications of these principles. The empty cup reminds us that no matter how much we learn, there is always room for more wisdom. The legacy you can create through wise application of these principles extends far beyond personal success. When you use invisible influence ethically and effectively, you can help others achieve better outcomes, contribute to organizational success, and even influence positive changes in your community or industry. The same principles that can advance your career can also be used to solve problems, build bridges between conflicting groups, and create opportunities for others. Begin today by choosing one principle that resonates most strongly with you. Perhaps it is the art of strategic patience, learning to wait for optimal timing rather than forcing immediate action. Perhaps it is environmental control, paying attention to how settings and circumstances influence behavior. Perhaps it is information management, becoming more strategic about what you share, when you share it, and with whom. Whatever principle you choose to start with, commit to practicing it consistently for at least 1 month. Invisible influence is a skill that develops through repetition and refinement, not through sporadic attempts. Like any sophisticated ability, it requires dedicated practice to move from conscious effort to unconscious competence. As you develop these capabilities, remember that the ultimate goal is not manipulation or domination, but effectiveness and value creation. The empty cup teaches us that true mastery comes from using power wisely, rather than simply accumulating power selfishly. Your influence should leave others better off than they were before, even if they never realize the role you played in their improvement. The wisdom of ages flows through this empty cup, waiting for you to fill it with your own experiences and insights. The principles I have shared are not the end of your education, but the beginning. Take them, test them, adapt them to your circumstances, and eventually teach them to others who are ready to learn. You now possess the same knowledge that guided my victories and shaped my legacy. The question is not whether these principles work. Centuries of application have proven their effectiveness. The question is whether you will have the patience, wisdom, and ethical commitment to apply them properly. The empty cup waits. Your journey toward invisible mastery begins with the next choice you make, the next interaction you have, the next opportunity you encounter. Make that choice wisely, and you will begin to understand what it truly means to control everything. Without anyone knowing, the student's cup is empty, ready to be filled with your own strategic mastery. Begin now.